Good morning, everybody. As you know, a few moments ago, the governor, the speaker, and I, on behalf of our respective caucuses, put out an announcement announcing a 2012-13 budget agreement. I want to thank the speaker. I want to thank the governor. I want to thank my Senate and Assembly colleagues. I want to give a special thank you to Senator Mark Leno, who helped lead the Senate with, I would emphasize, 60 public hearings vetting, every part of this budget. This is a budget that is not fundamentally different from the budget we passed on Friday. There are changes that were the result of difficult but ultimately productive negotiations around three particular areas: CalWORKs, child care, and Cal Grants, and now I would add a fourth, which would be healthy families. In each of these areas, we were able to find a middle ground with the governor that we believe minimizes the impact on people in need, while at the same time assures significant ongoing savings for the state budget. And I suppose that the last several days really capsulizes what the last 4 years have been about. We have not been afraid to cut when it is necessary, and we have made billions of dollars worth of cuts. But the struggle and the negotiation and some of the controversy is worth it when you can do even a little bit more, and I think in this case a lot more, to help people who are just trying to make it in a difficult economy here in California. The budget is balanced. It is balanced in the out years, and it leaves a structural surplus for the budget year 2015-16. And of course, the fact that we've come together and now produced the second on-time budget in a row, together with the other things we need to get done throughout the remainder of this year, I believe puts the governor and the legislature, but most importantly the state, in a position to take a case to the taxpayers that we need revenue to avoid even deeper cuts. And so we look forward to final passage of this budget, and I'll turn it over to my colleague Senator Leno, and then we're happy to answer your questions.
Sure. Senator Steinberg has said about all that needs to be said about the overall success of the passage of this budget. I just want to underscore that I think Californians should be pleased with the way the administration worked with both the Assembly and the Senate in reaching this on-time agreement. And I also just want to point out that the health and well-being of children and their families is reflected in the interconnectedness of actions that we take on CalWORKs, Cal Grants, child care, and healthy families, that these four different areas don't exist independent of one another. They all interlock and interact. And so that was very much a part of the negotiations of the last week.
And maybe just if I could pick up on that before the first question, an example, everyone likes to know sort of what happens on the inside. Well, you know that we were resisting even deeper cuts to child care and to CalWORKs. And we made additional cuts in each of those areas. But by agreeing to a phased-in approach of the healthy families population, the children, to Medi-Cal, phased in a very careful way, those savings allowed us then to not have to make even deeper cuts to the CalWORKs and the child care programs. We'd be glad to answer your questions.
Follow on the phased-in approach here, what that means either to the child care and CalWORKs. We'll talk about what phased-in approach means.
You can do that if you want.
Go ahead, Mark.
Okay.
So the phased-in for the transition of about 880,000 children currently in our Healthy Families program, which, keep in mind, is not an entitlement program. Medi-Cal managed care is. The first phase, which will begin January 1st, 2013, represents about 415,000 children. And of those that should be hopefully a very smooth transition, because they will be going from their existing provider to their existing provider, just in a different format. Then the second phase, which will begin later in the spring, will have safeguards in place to make sure that there is that smooth transition for the first phase before moving to the second, represents about 250,000 children who, again, will be moving from one provider to the same provider, but maybe from a different network of providers. And then the third phase, which again will be later in the year 2013, I think that represents somewhere, my numbers are getting a little foggy here, in the area of around 175,000. And that's where it's going to get more challenging for us to make sure that there is readiness and access, so that no child will find there is not provision of their health care for them.
Let me add, I want to add one thing on the readiness, which is a very key component here. We agreed to this on the following condition, and the language will be reflective of this condition, that no county can transfer children from healthy families to Medi-Cal unless they can demonstrate that there is a provider for that child being shifted. And that's why this has to be done with a phased approach.
How does it save money to transfer kids?
Well, number one, there are significant administrative efficiencies in having one program instead of two programs. That's the main issue. On the rate issue, I think that's still to be discussed over time as the transition occurs, but there's certainly significant administrative efficiencies.
I guess I was hoping too, you've done a CalWorks. I understand that it's a 2-year, but it can be spread over 4 years. Could you explain that?
Yes. So the governor's proposal was to say that during the first, there is a difference between state work requirements and federal work requirements. The federal work requirements are more restrictive. The governor said that a CalWorks applicant, a CalWorks client who has 4 years, can have 2 years of state work requirements, but then they have to shift into the tougher federal requirements. In our negotiation back and forth, we agreed to the governor's frame, but in exchange, we achieved the following. His change is only prospective, so only new clients who enter the CalWorks program will be affected. Secondly, the 2 years of mandatory federal requirements can be floating over the 4 years. In other words, people who are trying to get to self-sufficiency, trying to get back into the workforce in this tough economy, it's not always a straight line. You know, you may have a job for 3 months or 6 months and then get laid off. And so now, so long as you meet the federal requirements 24 months out of the full 48, you continue your eligibility. Third, for people who fall into the federal category, counties will be allowed to extend for people who aren't formally meeting the federal work requirements for up to 20% of the remaining population. And the reasons for extension, which will be stated in the statute, can be everything from you're very close to completing your education or training or certification program, you're looking for work, but you can't find work in the particular, county that you live in, and that you're close to completion. And those people will have we call it presumptive right to extend, even if they're not formally meeting the federal requirements, up to 20% of the population.
And on that 20%, it is 20% of the overall, but when you look at the overall and break it down, 65% of those participating in the program enter it and complete it and move on with their lives. Another 10% are exempt from the requirements because they have a disability or they're caring for an ill child, whatever. That leaves about 25%. So it's really 20% of 25%. So we're talking about 5% of the overall will be impacted by this 20%. So, and the governor understood that it is a relatively small amount.
Can you talk about IHSS, please? How you treat those hours and people? Is it the same as it was? Is it negotiated anything different?
Well, at this point where the IHSS issue stands is that we plan to continue the 3.6% reduction in the budget year. And we will score additional savings in the out years. And there still is ongoing discussions between the administration and the advocates about how to achieve that. Because there are pending lawsuits in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. The governor proposed some new cuts. There will be a combination, undoubtedly, of the two that will lead to the out-year savings. But for this year, we score, what is it, $90 million by continuing the 3.6% reduction.
The governor agrees to that?
Yes.
Did you change the trigger at all, the amount of money and trigger or anything like that?
Nope. The trigger was not an item of controversy. It answers the question that, skeptics sometimes like to ask, well, geez, what if the taxes don't pass? What are you saying then? You're just going to come back and try to, fix it on the fly? No. We have no interest in scaring voters. That isn't the point. The point, though, is that voters should be presented with with the clear choices. And if we don't pass the taxes, there will be commensurate, very deep cuts in education and other areas.
And there's been some questioning about the deep cuts in the trigger for education. The alternative was to have cuts currently and maybe lessen the trigger cuts, but then that would have impacted K through 12 potentially unnecessarily should the taxes pass. On the other hand, a different situation, the courts are taking their cuts up front. They're being spared in the trigger.
The RDA money will not be part. Let's be careful here. There's a big RDA piece here. It's about worth $3 billion to implement AB 26 of last year. But on the $250 million county pass-through that you referred to, that will not be part of the budget. The counties will get that money. And on Cal Grants, the change we make from last Friday is to provide a little bit more relief to students who are attending nonprofit institutions in terms of the amount of their Cal Grant. But then we come down a little harder beginning in 2013-14 on schools, the for-profit schools that aren't meeting a minimal 30% graduation rate. And so
and have a higher than 10% default.
Have a higher than 10% default.
But you cut off the Cal Grants for those profit schools in 13-14, yet you're storing the savings in 12-13. I'm trying to figure that out.
For new students, beginning in 12-13, if a for-profit school does not meet the graduation and or default requirements, no Cal Grant can go for a new student. For the recurring students, the change we make is that beginning in 13-14, those grants cannot be renewed. So those students then would have a year, essentially, to either transfer to a school that is meeting the graduation
Public or
rates.
private.
Public or private.
And that's where the $50 million extra for community college.
There's not necessarily a no. I mean, we do say that if the election passes, that there will be $50 million that wouldn't have to be spent on paying off the full community college deferral, that could be used for growth, but only if the election passes.
So the $50 million for community colleges is contingent
Yes.
on
The election.
taxes.
Yes.
Yes.
The governor was looking for $880 million in savings from the Cal courts. What is it getting?
We're still scoring that. We still don't. We're still working on a definitive number from that. But what we're not doing, let's be clear what we're not doing in the CalWorks area. We are not doing the grant cuts. The grant cuts that would put CalWorks recipients at 24% of the federal poverty level. And that was a big chunk of it.
So what happens after if you don't meet the work requirements? Are your grants still going to be reduced?
you're going to be out. You may be able to shift to the child-only program, which is a lesser grant.
So you'd be in the child-only program, but the child-only program grants won't be cut if the governor wanted to.
We're not cutting the child-only grant programs, correct? Go ahead, Craig, help with this one, please.
The changes, what we had last Friday was about $427 million by continuing the single allocation cut, so that we had, the number we're waiting for the scoring is gonna be roughly equivalent, but it's a very different construct.
The construct is we are going to fund workforce training and job training for those who are currently exempt, but we're going to phase that back in for those recipients over a 2-year period of time. 24 months. The people with kids under, yes, we're going to phase out the exemption for parents with kids under 2 and with more than 2 kids under 6. We're going to phase that out and begin reinstating the work requirement, fund the job training consistent with that phase-in. And that will cost some money, but then we're offsetting it with the other solutions that we
Can you talk more about the flexibility counties have to handle people on CalWorks? How does that exactly work?
They will have the ability to grant extensions for people who would otherwise be cut off for up to 20% of their population. And
20% of people on CalWorks.
20% of the people who are in that federal cohort there, okay? And within that 20%, if an individual is meeting the criteria, close to certification, looking for a job, can't find one, they will be then what we call presumptively eligible to gain an extension. Now, if the county hits their 20% threshold and then the next person is presumptively eligible, we believe we can deal with that administratively to give the counties the ability to grant extensions in those instances as well.
Who pays for that 20% people? I mean, who pays for those people who counties agree?
They're going to continue to They're going to continue to have the assistance that they have now.
That's not gonna come out of the county pocket though.
It's just within their single county
So they
allocation.
have to, in effect, it's money out of the county's pocket to extend.
Well, it's state money. It's state money that we're sending to the counties as part of their single allocation factor. And we are, so let me get at what I think your question is getting at. What incentive is there for counties to give people extensions? The incentive will be that we are saying in law that if somebody meets the criteria that I described before, they will be presumptively eligible, which means if they're denied, they'll have the ability to get to appeal, get a fair hearing, and likely get the extension that they seek.
And that was a negotiated point with the governor, but he understood that it made no sense for someone who's on the path that he wants them to be on to cut them off on an arbitrary date when their graduation might be a month or 2 later, or they're something else that they're working toward to get themselves through successfully the program.
Sure. We went, I'd rather look this way. No. The Friday budget at a 5% across the board cut. We do 2 changes. We up that to 8.7%. Saves about $80 million, additional $80 million. And we suspend the child care COLA in 2013, 14, and 14, 15. And by the way, don't like any of it. These are sober decisions. We do the very best we can to balance and minimize impact and harm. But there is a potential prize at the other end of this, which is, it is true that the more ongoing solutions we can put into place now, the quicker we won't have to begin a January, head into a May revise, head to a June 15th budget deadline with a deficit. And that would be it's already a different world with Prop 25. That'll be a real different world when we're no longer dealing with deficit.
So 8.7%, is that 8.7% cut to slots or reimbursement rates or hours? How does that work?
How does that help them?
It's across the board, and we'll leave it to the discretion of the counties to determine how
No,
to.
I'm sorry, what I mean is it 8.7% cut to funding, or is it 8.7% cut to childcare slots?
Funding.
Funding, okay. But we don't know how many slots that'll be.
We don't.
Wasn't it originally something like a $450 million?
Yeah,
So this actually scored better with child.
correct.
Or you
Yes,
said
it
you
is.
don't like it, this was better than the alternative.
Well, of course it's, but yes, I mean, that was the product of a good, hard negotiation.
You're not still doing the shift of 98 SBR?
That- Right.
Oh, we're still doing, yeah,
That was
on
early agreed
Friday,
upon.
that was agreed upon.
Darryl, what was the breakthrough moment? Can you talk about that for a moment? I mean, as we had all kind of assumed, welfare was kind of at the core discussion. Is that fair to say? And when you got through that, you kind of get through everything, or can you give us some?
Well,
Don't lean too far back as you're.
I will say, and then I'll let Mark answer as well. Every one of these budgets could be their own 1-hour dramas, you know? Not that anyone would watch, but they all have a different rhythm and different personalities and this and that. I think that if there was a breakthrough, I think for me, it was recognizing that we could reduce the hit on childcare in CalWorks by agreeing to a shift of kids over time and in the right way from the healthy families to medical. That to me was that was kind of like the final puzzle piece that allowed us to add up the numbers and make it work. And you know, we worked very, very well with the Assembly. You know, Speaker and a lot of their members were engaged, and you know, we really went about this, I think, since Friday in a mode of trying to solve the problem. We needed more cuts. The governor put out some reforms. We wanted to make it more reasonable and make it work for the people that we represent. And as we always do, we found a middle ground. Mark?
Only to add, John, that which I said at the beginning, the interconnectedness of all of these different programs, how they impact low-income families and their children, and that, to the governor's credit, he recognized that there was possibly a more thoughtful way to get to the end goal that he wanted, in particular in CalWorks, to give the incentive for work, at the same time realizing that it doesn't help California at all if we have so many additional hundreds of thousands of families and children homeless. And we recognized that, as Darryl said, a piece in that puzzle was going with the governor on the phased-in approach to the transition of healthy families to Medi-Cal.
Can you address the rainy day fund, the reserve, what's happening with that, the differential?
We're still adding up the numbers, but it'll be, you know, comparable, I believe, to what we presented on Friday. Maybe a little more, maybe a little less. We're still adding up the numbers. I want to make one editorial comment too about the governor for a moment here, because you know, you can look at these budgets in many different ways. And first of all, note that because of the fact that we represent and lead different institutions of government, that we sometimes, in fact, often disagree. And this was no exception. But when you look at it, when you look at a governor who stepped into this job with a $19.2 billion deficit, and going into this year without any support from the minority party, lowering that structural deficit to about $8 billion, and then working with the legislative branch of government to come to where we're at today, we are on the back end of this thing. We are on the back end of this deficit. And if we pass those taxes in November, we will really be starting, I believe, a new chapter here in California. And that's to his credit. That's to his credit. And I think to some degree, put modesty aside, it's to the legislature's credit as well. Everybody would love this thing to be done in one snap of the fingers. But given what's at stake for people and the sensitivity of these kinds of cuts, the fact that we're able to chip away at this thing to get to where we're at now, I want to thank the governor and the legislature for continuing to stay at it.
I said, one second.
Talk about high-speed rail, because the question's gonna come up with all these cuts that are being agreed to. How come we're moving forward with high-speed rail? Is that a part of your negotiations? How do you think about it?
High-speed rail, it goes fast. I'm kidding. It is a sensitive topic, and this was not part of our negotiation. But we now have between now and the 4th of July to get a lot of business done, and we have to look at the whole plate: pensions, high-speed rail, foreclosure reform, which Senator Leno has led on, and we need to get as much done as we can before that. Look, in terms of the high-speed rail, we get it that it may not be, it's not popular, okay? But if you look back in history of this state and in this country, there were a lot of skeptics who said, spending money to send people to the moon, the Apollo project, you know, why would we ever waste our money on that? People, you know, talked about building out the highway system. Why would you spend so much money on that? You know, sometimes that which is unpopular in the short term is vital for the long term here in California. And I believe in the project because I believe that we desperately need infrastructure investment, that the vision is the right vision, and while there is a risk that if we do this, we may not get more federal funding, although I believe we will, there's also a great risk in not going forward because we won't create the investment and we'll never know whether or not we would have built this out, creating all the many more jobs and a new transportation system for Californians into the next century.
Darrell, I want to jump in and just follow up on your previous editorial comment.
Go.
In recognizing the governor's leadership, and I said something similar in my comments when I presented the budget last week, that governor recognizing that we have lost tens of billions of dollars of revenue as a result of the international fiscal crisis, we needed to make yet more painful, difficult cuts. But as the Legislative Analyst's Office has been telling us for years and years and years, as a result of the tax cuts in the early part of the last decade, we had a structural imbalance in our budget from which we could not grow out. And that was repeated. So what the November revenue measure attempts to do is to refill a hole that was dug in 2003 that has never been refilled. And until we do that, this chronic 8, 9, 10 billion that we keep bumping into will not go away. With the passage of the measure in November, with the cuts that we have made, 8 billion represented in this 12-13 budget, we're going to finally get ourselves back up to sea level, and that will be a structurally balanced budget, not only for 12-13, but 14-15, up to 16, where we're going to hit a slight surplus. Imagine that, what an antiquated term. So it is to the governor's credit that he looked at this straight in the eye and said, this is what we've got to do. And now it's our job to make sure we communicate to the voters why this measure in November is critical and crucial to our resolving our budget problems.
Do you think does your plan with the shift to healthy families, does it rely on the Supreme Court upholding ACA, or would that change the savings and or the cost to the state of that shift?
I don't believe that we are talking about the existing public health side of the budget. And so I don't believe that, we don't know what the Supreme Court decision will be. But shifting from the existing Healthy Families program to the existing Medi-Cal program, I don't believe would be affected by an adverse Supreme Court decision.
Sure.
But there's probably more to analyze there.
Senator, a couple answers ago, you mentioned July 4th. You wanted to get the pensions. I wanted to know what's the magic July 4th, and do you include the water bond in that?
No, I don't include the water bond in there, but I mean, I think it's likely the water bond is going to be continued until 2014. That is likely, but I don't think we'll take that up in the next week and a half. I think there are 3 hot things on our agenda, amongst others: foreclosure relief, pension reform, and high-speed rail. And I'm not saying that we will get all 3 of them done before the recess, but we're going to endeavor to get as much of the work done as possible before the
There are
recess.
recess date, there's no deadline.
No, it's, yes, and, you know, gotta get our work done.
We're already on pension reform, because the Republicans were saying today they tried to pass a motion today to get the governor's plan implemented, and that it was shot down.
Did the Republicans complain today?
They did.
I must have been preoccupied. Look, I'll repeat a little bit of what I said on the floor. It's fair to say, show us, don't just tell us. We've got to get it done. They're not exactly the most credible messengers, however, having voted largely against the 2010 pension reform that cut back formulas for state employees, including correctional peace officers. And last year, they blew the golden opportunity to negotiate a comprehensive agreement with the governor because of their anti-tax position. I've said it all along, we will meet the governor's 12 principles. We have a slightly different way to do a hybrid, not a voluntary hybrid, by the way, a mandatory hybrid. And yet, we're confident that we can come together with the governor. Now that the budget's behind us, or will be behind us, we can finish that as well.
And what day are you shooting for trailer bill votes?
We're going to shoot
We'll
for...
be in committee on Monday afternoon, and we'll be on the floor since we have a very busy policy committee and bill presentation day for everybody on Tuesday. We'll probably get to the floor late Tuesday afternoon, early evening to pass all the trailer bills.
And what about the 130-mile stretch in High-Speed Rail? Do you think that negotiations of that are ongoing? Is that going to affect the appropriations for the money?
If I had my say alone, I would probably take the federal money and the state money, bond money, and I would start it in a different place. But that is not the agreement between the state of California and the federal government. And so when I said earlier that there is risk in doing it, because you build that Central Valley line and you need more money to build the connections to Northern and Southern California, I think there is even greater risk in not going forward, because we will have the opportunity over the course of the next years and decades to build the project out. Plus, as part of the blended approach, there will be at least $1 billion of investment into the Northern and Southern California corridors on top of the Central Valley line.
But do you think it'll be a struggle getting this through the Senate to make sure that the bonds are authorized?
Oh, it will be a tight vote. Yes, it's a tough vote. And we've been spending, and Senator Leno's, been involved in this as well. We've been spending a lot of time with colleagues on this. And I can't predict the outcome, but I'm personally committed to this. And
As am I.
yeah, and I want to see it work.
Is your general fund spending still at 92, with all these cuts?
We don't know yet. We'll give you the, they're still adding up the numbers, but it'll be, we're obviously including more cuts from Friday, so it may go down a little bit, but it'll be close.
Are you gonna have to
That
redo,
first, I'm sorry.
are you gonna have to redo the main budget bill?
No. We have what we call,
Passed on Friday, will.
yes, that stands.
And then all these other things will be encompassed in.
But final spending will be lower than 92.1 because.
Well, we're making more cuts.
What do you do? You're gonna, that budget will change.
We're gonna do, budget bill the third, I think. Budget bill junior was already born, so that'll be
So you have to
the
send
next
a new-
generation.
A new budget bill itself,
No,
just
the
all the trailer bills.
trailer bills, and as we passed some very minor amendments in what we called Budget Bill Junior last week, again, minor amendments we would put into a Budget Bill Junior.
Which allows me to reinforce before everyone leaves here, what I said at the beginning. What we will do on Tuesday is not fundamentally different from what we did on Friday, June the 15th. We passed the budget bill and the budget on June the 15th. These are amendments that reflect the last several issues that were left open between the legislature and the governor.
Has the governor indicated he's gonna wait for all the trailer bills before he signs it? or-
You have to ask the governor. I mean, certainly we're very cognizant and sensitive to his deadlines as well on June 30th. And again, second straight year, we will have a budget completed, signed by the governor before the start of the next fiscal year.
When did you seal the deal with the governor? Last night, morning? When was the end?
Last night. It's about 6:30 last night, I think. About 6:30. Might have been 6:35. I don't know.